keep track of it all.
Well, clearly I struggled as well.
Listen, we're doing this right after the game, and so I'm so unbelievably happy that we won because I legitimately can't imagine being awake at 12:30 in the morning doing a live stream pod recording after a loss. Like I don't think my brain would have allowed us to do that. But I said win, lose, or draw, so I almost like backed ourselves into a corner here.
It's true. Well, luckily we get to be happy. Yeah, morning.
Right. It's early Sunday morning, like the earliest Sunday morning Fallout recording of all time.
All right, I'm gonna hit record and we'll go. You know, do you do a special thing on the Fallout? Now I can't remember. You don't do a special intro, do you?
I mentioned it's a Fallout.
Okay, cool. Here we go. Welcome everyone to the Fallout version of Flyover Footy, or Flyover Fallout, as we call it sometimes. It's been a while since I've done this. Not terribly long because I got to do it while Matt was out of town, but here I am. You're listening to my voice introduce a Fallout. Matt Baker's here. We're doing a late night edition after dark, right?
That's right. If you're listening to this on your podcast, then this is not your normal Flyover Fallout. Here with Phil Groom. Santiago might join us later. We might get a cameo appearance from Santi. So stay tuned if you miss his salacious voice that usually joins us on Sunday mornings as we record. This is also the earliest ever Flyover Fallout that we've recorded, as we are coming at you live on YouTube and on socials right after the press conference of our 2-1 win over the San Jose Earthquakes. And if you're listening to this later on, it might have a different flavor because these are kind of knee-jerk reactions. You know, we watched it with a little bit of an analytical eye, knowing that we'd be doing this right after the game, but these are fresh takes, so we'll see how well they age.
Before we go, we got to thank Noble Ice Vineyards for sponsoring our show, so thank you so much. This Fallout is for you, Noble Ice. I hope you appreciate it every time you listen.
And you know, if it were a little earlier, if it was like a 7:30 or a 6:30 game, you know, we'd probably be having some Noble Ice or the swirls or the sangrias or something. But you know, we're just fighting to stay awake at this point.
That'd be perfect. I think the air's going to get cooler tomorrow, if I saw the weather correctly. So it would have been perfect for that.
Fall might be here.
Well, Matt, let's dig into the game. I am going to make you do the lineups because you're just so darn good at it. So let's start with the STL lineup.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a surprise compared to what we thought we were going to get. We had Roman Berkey in net, Giannis Horn, Kyle Hebert, Josh Yarrow, and Thomas Totland made up the back line. Chris Durkin was our lone central midfielder. Nukvi Thorson, Marcel Hartl, Cedric Toyshirt, Rasmus Alm were the attacking mids, and Klaus was our striker. This was a 4-1-4-1, which post-game Hackworth did confirm this was a new formation for them. It's not something that they had tried really before, at least under Hackworth's leadership. He also kind of alluded to the fact that on the attack, this was more of a 4-3-3, so they had a little bit of a different shape in who they pushed up, pushing Durkin more into the midfield with Hartl and Toyshirt. But no matter what, the surprises to this lineup, formation aside, were mainly surrounding the central midfield role. It's not just that Chris Durkin was able to go and Henry Kessler was not able to go with concussion protocol. It was also the absence of Edu Leuven. And Hackworth post-game, let's just cut right to it, post-game told us that it was his hamstring, and they're just managing that load. It's not necessarily that he has an injury, but he did liken it to Chris Durkin, where Durkin playing, Hackworth was not concerned about re-injuring or re-aggravating the knee. It was knee inflammation that Durkin's been dealing with. And so Durkin was good to go, as Hackworth said, surprisingly, given his designations throughout the week and how cautious he was being talking about it. While Durkin was able to go, Leuven was left behind. Leuven stayed in St. Louis, didn't make the trip out. And so this is more precautionary maintenance. There is going to be interest in the coming week to see how Leuven trains with the team. But ultimately, I think this was an effort to make sure that they're just managing that and that he's good to go for the derby next week.
Yep. And I think there was, let's talk about the lineup debate, because I think we were like, is it 4-1-4-1? Is it a 4-2-3-1? And each would have worked in the way that it was listed as usual on the lineup announcement from the team. And so, I think we were kind of arguing over it. Well, is Hartl going to have to play like a Leuven? I almost said if he played in that position, it would look kind of like Ostrak meets Leuven, with Hartl playing in that 8 that moves forward and Durkin's kind of staying back. So, I was a little worried about Hartle having to defend, but I thought he's done a good job in the past tracking back. I think we've all seen that in the past, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So he can do it, I think, but that's a lot of defensive responsibility for our number one playmaker in this game. But instead we saw a 4-1-4-1, which in that case, for me, the worry is what is Teukert defending going to look like? Because we're going to see as we go through this game that clearly he had some responsibility, and he definitely had to track back and do number 8 things at times more than he's ever done with the City, at least.
Yeah, and that was where I saw in the second half, most notably, was Marcel Hartle, who I felt was tracking back, where at this point Durkin had already been subbed out, and so it was Akil Watts. And that in of itself, I think that's worthy of a conversation later on when we get into that second half piece. But the way Akil Watts was managing that central midfield role was vastly different, I think, than what Chris Durkin was doing. And in conjunction with that, we were under such a heavy assault in the second half compared to early on in the game that I think by necessity, Hartle kind of dropped back a little bit until JGR made his appearance.
Which was pretty late in the game. Do you want to go over the San Jose lineup, or should we just jump in?
No, we could just jump in. There weren't too many surprises for San Jose. You had Jeremy Ebobisse back in, Christian Espinoza, Mal Pellegrino. Those guys were in. Honestly, the biggest thing that I think frames this match from a San Jose lineup perspective is that Daniel was not their goalkeeper. It was William Yarbrough back in the lineup. And if you listen to my solo job on Flyover Footy last week, this was a huge difference maker. Just having Yarbrough in. Yarbrough had 0 saves in this game. He only had 2 shots on target, so it's not like St. Louis was peppering him, and that'll be something we talk about in a minute. But in general, Yarbrough is just such a bad shot stopper compared to Daniel. And I don't think Daniel would have stopped the Teuscher goal early on in the game, just 4 minutes in. But the sheer fact that Yarbrough was there over Daniel was a difference maker that I made note of.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's jump into it. It came hard and fast. I definitely noticed that as the team was attacking, you would kind of see the 2 center backs furthest back, Durkin sitting in front of them, and then everyone else able to get forward. In the second minute, I kind of noticed that that's what was happening in the build out. And so a lot of guys forward, only Durkin and 2 center backs kind of guarding the counter attack, which I like. I thought that was fun. Lots of attack there. In the third minute, we don't have to wait long. Teukert gets his goal. It's a quick play down the left with Horn and Hartle interchanging very nicely. Cross goes in. It skips to a wide open Teukert on the far. Oh, no. Pardon me. Yes, a wide open Teukert on the far side of the field. Yep. And Alm gave it a nice dummy on the way through. I'm not sure if he touched it or not. I liked that a lot. But Teukert hammers it home in the second minute. We get our first goal nice and early. It felt so good. Such a relief away to get that early goal.
Yeah, I don't think Alm touched it at all. And the thing that I really enjoyed about that goal was the lead up to it. The way that Giannis Horn had the throw in from the far side. And he threw it in while he made his run high. A couple St. Louis City players were passing it back and forth, drawing the defense back. And that was key to free up the space for Giannis Horn to maneuver out wide. And then it was just off and running, that transition. And so in that transition, the spacing of the attackers was so vitally important. And it was notable to me that you had Alm come in so hard towards the ball that he was on the inside part from Cedric Teuscher, because obviously Alm plays that right wing position on this game. And so having him cut in so hard, it almost, post-game, Cedric Teuscher talked to us and he reiterated that his favorite position is underneath the action, right underneath where the strikers are, right underneath where the main attack is. And so it allows him to see that part of the field, kind of do all the dirty work to clean it up. And this was kind of like that, where the ball was crossed in and Teuscher had positioned himself so well that he just had this vision of the field, in addition to the fact that his spacing left him so wide open and he had an easy angle for a goal. So like holistically, I felt that this play was the tone setter that we needed to really start things off.
Not to mention we had Alm going very high and cutting very far inside. And Teukert, by playing that 8 role, not underneath the striker, had the latest run and ended up in a really nice place. So, coming from deep is hard to defend, and it worked out here very nicely. In the 5th minute was the first time I noticed a very clear in defense 4-1-4-1. So nice and easy to see that every time they kind of lined up in defense. It was very organized. We have a passing diagram that showed it very clearly as well. that came out after the game. 6th minute, we see Toykert for the first time. I just wanted to note that this is the first time he had to track back, get real dirty into a tackle kind of far back on the field. And then it popped out and he still had to go run it down in the a little bit further back. He had a guy in his back and he still got out of trouble. He did a fine job as an 8 doing the dirty work there. So that was nice. In the 7th minute, there's a turnover and a counter in favor of St. Louis. Thor keeps it alive after a pass from the left. Klaus gets what I assumed would be a goal. And it went wide with his left foot. Yeah. It was like the Klaus kind of moment. Actually, maybe the Klaus moment of the game, I would say. The kind of thing, like the Klaus kind of goal, the Klaus kind of chance, and unfortunately not the Klaus finish.
Definitely the best chance, that's for sure. And I think part of that is the fact that we didn't have very many shots in general, less shots on target. We only had 7 total shots in this entire game. I made note that we only had 4 total shots up to the first 75 minutes. So this was definitely Klaus's chance. And the ball was a little bit behind him. So it was one of those plays that was, I think I referred to it as like pinpoint accuracy, but it was just a millisecond behind each player, I felt. Thorson's pass over to Klaus, just a little bit behind, and they were almost just barely keeping that ball in play. And so Klaus didn't have a good angle when he kind of swept his leg back to get to the ball, and he didn't really have a good angle to turn his body to be able to get it on goal, but dangerous opportunity, good positioning overall by the attackers.
10th minute, the possible PK. I did not see this live, Matt, but there was a VAR stop, and I was like, what are they even looking at? And it was Hartl getting taken out by Rodriguez at the top of the box. Was it in the box? Was it not? Was it a PK? Was it a foul? Was it a nothing? It was ruled a PK. Hack was asked about this afterward, and he said, I don't know what anything is anymore. What did you think, Matt? What did you see?
I won't lie. When I saw it live, even right after the replay, I thought that he tagged his foot just outside the box. And so I was under the impression that where the actual contact occurs is where the foul is, or where that focal point of the foul is where the penalty would get called one way or another. So Hartl is obviously at the top of the box. He's moving in. He recovers the ball. And so he's moving into the box. You could even argue that his forward foot is in the box, which I think it was. His body is in the box. And the foot that gets clipped by Rodriguez is outside the box. But they reviewed it. They saw it a couple different ways. The angles that they looked at, I thought were fascinating because I think the Apple broadcast did a good job of showing us the different angles and the speeds at which they were looking at this. They even looked to the buildup just to see live what it looked like, and then slowed it down, trying to identify where the contact took place. But, I mean, this is whatever their reasoning was. It was a clear and obvious foul. That's for sure. And I wonder if it was just at that line so close that they made the call. So, I live watching it, I thought it was just outside the box, but, I will absolutely take it because we've been on the receiving end of plenty of these no calls for sure.
Yeah, well said. I completely agree with that. So in the 12th minute, the PK goal happens. Classic stutter from Hartl that gives me a freaking heart attack every time. Luckily, Yarbrough kind of went to his left, and Hartl placed it low and left to the bottom corner. Not hard, but at that point, Yarbrough had made his move and couldn't move anymore toward the. So it's a goal to over-explain the PK. That's the PK. Right. 13th minute, I noticed there's still more chances coming. Passes in and around the box. Great run inside from Totland, but it was sent a little bit too far from him on the far post. It was out for a goal kick. 14th minute, Chakiris is chopped down for a free kick about 5 yards outside the box or so. Lopez kicks it into a wall. An offside stops play after that. But it was a decent cross. Like, it was a little bit of a scary moment for San Jose, or scary for St. Louis after the cross.
Dangerous for San Jose.
And not the last time we're going to see a cross be a little bit scary for St. Louis. I guess cross balls, when you watch a team, they're like the top crossers in the league. They said that a few times as far as the number of crosses in the league. And so any team that crosses it in a lot kind of tends to give me heart attacks in general.
Well, that Sakaris free kick right there was the first big opportunity they had on a dead ball. And that's one of the things that San Jose really tries to target. They try to earn these dead ball opportunities, whether it's a free kick, whether it's a corner kick. And that's where they try to get the bulk of their goals. They're one of the they're the one of the lowest scoring teams in the league, but they are the worst team in the league when it comes to open play goals. So this to me was the first indication of, okay, we need to make sure, we need to see how we're showing up early on these free kicks, because this is going to be one of their bread and butters. They're going to go back to this a few times. And they did. They earned some fouls. They earned a couple of these opportunities throughout the game. But I think St. Louis did a good job mitigating the free kicks. The corner kicks, I'm always just worried about us giving up corner kick goals. I feel there's something to our corner kick defense in 2024. But thankfully, we did enough to prevent that. And it all started with this 14th minute Sekeres free kick.
Yep. So it was blocked. Everything ended up just fine. In the 22nd minute, I noted that Alm was back in defense in the defensive third, and he did like a facing our own goal. He kicked it over his head, so behind him, flips around, and he's got two guys all over him. I think there's actually three guys in the area.
Yeah.
And then he kind of Cruyff side passes it out into open space for a nice counterattack. It didn't end up in anything, but I thought that was really good play from Alm, who had many of those kind of moments throughout the game. That was my favorite. The 23rd. Go ahead.
On Rasmus Alm, one of the things that I think Hackworth had said this past week, that he had tried him at like a right wing back at one point last week. And the fact that he was working as a legitimate right winger, not even a right mid, but he was given the space on the right side to move, I think this gave him some flexibility to track back as well. So the width that we gave with that 4-1-4-1 look did offer a little bit of an opportunity for our wingers to move up and down the field. You didn't really see Thor go up and down as much as Hartl, so there was some movement on that left side to cover and track back when we needed to, but it was definitely Alm on that right side doing it.
Indeed. 23rd minute. There's a chance after a long ball. Klaus controls it, but Thor slips. So much Thor hate in this game.
It's the field too. I mean, like,
yeah,
this field was just not. And PayPal, I think, has this reputation of it's a grass field. It's a nice field, but for whatever reason, it's just always tough traction. And you had Jay Reed later on slip a couple times in this.
Yeah.
So when I saw Thor go down, I was like, okay, this isn't Thor. This is the field, is what I attributed it to.
Yeah, and there were two big Thor slips that could have been something special for St. Louis, perhaps. And then he was a bit wasteful in this game, more than usual. So I will allow the Thor hate in this game, but y'all get it a little bit out of control. So let's just keep it a little bit controlled here. 24th minute, Durkin gets hurt. Matt, there were a lot of comments after, so I'll let you kind of talk about this one.
Yeah, I mean, he went down on the field and then he subbed out. You could just see he was telling Hackworth that he can't go. And the important thing to note is what Hackworth's comments were post-game about Chris Durkin. And it's very different than Edu Leuven. And honestly, Hackworth had said post-game that he had no real concerns in starting Chris Durkin. He said he has a bruise on his knee, and his knee yesterday and today, in fact, was fine. But he took another knock and he hit a ball and he just felt like it was really weak. And Hackworth didn't have any concern starting him. But after that comment saying he had a weak knee, I don't think they were messing around with it anything after that. So Hack didn't seem like he was concerned about long-term implications for Durkin, even going so far, like I mentioned earlier, to when talking about Edu Leuven, Hack was saying that it's a night and day difference, not even the same conversation, where Leuven didn't play because they didn't want to aggravate or re-aggravate a hamstring type of a thing. Durkin, inflammation of the knee, no concerns with re-injury. It's not that type of an injury concern. So the feeling weak, the hitting a ball and it just feeling not right, get him out of there, precautionary. The big problem with this sub, though, ultimately was that it impacted every other substitution decision that Hackworth made after this. It was such a big cascade effect. I almost sent out a tweet, but things were going kind of pretty fast and furious at this point.
Yeah.
Hackworth mentioned earlier this week, and it was a question by Tom Schwartz from St. Louis Soccer United. We used to be a show on Sunday mornings on 590, The Fan. But he asked a question about substitutions and timings and Hackworth's propensity. Does he want to, or would he recommend subbing in the first half? And Hackworth was very adamant. No, that's not his MO. You would never recommend doing that. You want to give your guys a run out no matter who you start your 11. You give them a go and you see how they go with 45 at least. This changed everything with that. And so it did. It was the inflection point to me. You can argue that it happened a little bit earlier in the game, but when Watts came in for Durkin at 24, everything kind of changed. The actions of both of those players while occupying the same spot was vastly different. Felt Watts was honestly pushing higher a lot more at times. Whereas Durkin, I felt, was doing a fairly good job of staying within himself there in between the lines. He was kind of migrating between the lines at times, but he wasn't moving up too high like Watts did a handful of times. And I think that changed a little bit of what we needed to do elsewhere. In addition, it also changed things like the Giannis Horn sub. That occurred at halftime because Hackworth did not want to use another sub window because he already was down one from the Durkin sub. And so
and to be
all
clear, Horn was asking to come off in the 40th minute. That's not something I knew until Hack talked in the post-game presser.
Yeah, so there's a lot of nuances that went into this with Durkin that cascaded to the rest of the game.
Yeah, and if let's talk about the Watts sub too, because I think a lot of people were upset about that for whatever reason. Watts is a trusted guy from Hackworth. They've been together for a very long time, and so it's not terribly surprising that Watts came on here. I think a lot of people expected JGR because in a 4-1-4-1, someone who plays like a hybrid center back 6 role makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But in the build out, I have a lot of moments that we're going to talk about. Some of Watts' bad moments come very quickly here, and then Watts makes up for it throughout the game. You kind of see why he was in. He's weak in some areas, he's strong in other areas, and so I'm just gonna, we're gonna be very fair to Watts in this one. But when he came on, we talk about how good Durkin is in the rotation, in the midfield rotation when we're trying to play out of the back. Once Durkin joined this team, that was something we could do regularly. It's something we should have felt very lucky to have once he came into this team, because it wasn't something that happened regularly last year without Leuven really dropping in and taking control. And so that's something we've had. That's something we've been lucky to have. And it kind of disappeared with Watts. And I think that should be something that we take note of. And so Santiago's joining us now. Actually, Santiago, how's it going? We're talking about Watts joining the squad as Durkin came out, and the good and bad of that. The bad kind of came first, but let's welcome you before we continue the conversation. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great, guys. Happy that the team finally won an away game, and it may not matter anymore, but still a good feeling. And now the team goes back to St. Louis to play against Sporting KC.
Hey, now, to be fair, and let's just get this out of the way right now, that St. Louis has not been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. But you know who has been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs? Sporting Kansas.
Oh, official.
They have officially, with tonight's results, been mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. And in addition, let's just get this out of the way because we buried the lead on this. With this win, St. Louis is no longer able to win the wooden spoon.
Oh, thank God.
We have gotten over that hump. We are no longer in contention for that. So those two things are reason enough to celebrate.
Yeah, I agree. I've been worried about that. That was going to be my next question. Like, what's the wooden spoon math? That's what I want to hear. So I'm glad that's not a thing anymore. We lost Santi. Right. I think he's got some connectivity problems, but we'll bring him in.
We'll get him back
when he comes back. All right. So right away here, the 26th minute, there's a giveaway. After Yaro, it looks like there's a couple build-outs that just things weren't looking as natural as they normally look. And there was some problem solving being attempted by Yaro. So if anyone's mad at Yaro for losing the ball, he didn't have anyone to pass to. All he had was moving forward. And this is something that's a good quality in a center back if they have the confidence to push forward into the midfield, find a pass. That's an awesome thing. It's a problem-solving thing that even the national team struggles with sometimes. Now, Yaro gave it away once he got upfield, and that's a little bit more scary than punting it, if what could have been another option here, a more conservative option. Mm-hmm. But this led to a counterattack. It was maybe Berkey's best save here. There was a cutback pass and a shot, Espinoza to Lopez. Great shot, lower left. I can't believe Berkey stopped it.
Honestly, a lot of the sequences that you noted, Phil, after this Durkin thing before they ended up scoring, are like rinse and repeat. It's St. Louis is unable to get possession. St. Louis is stuck deeper in their zone. We've got some giveaways. Berkey's save there at 26-27 was the first real chance that San Jose had. And that was this next piece of the inflection point where Durkin went out, that they had this good chance. Berkey made a worldy save. And then they continued to not really pressure Berkey necessarily, but they continued to gain the momentum. Like if you look at those momentum charts, they have San Jose taking the momentum overwhelmingly after we scored our second goal. And they didn't really let up until halftime when we got a little bit of the momentum back, mostly talking about the possession numbers. This is a San Jose team that is last in MLS in overall possession, average possession per game. And they had a large volume. At one point, it was 57, 58% possession in the first half. And that's what they were doing is they were possessing the ball. They were trying to break us down. And it turned into a game that I don't think anybody really expected. So that entire sequence there, from what you had noted between like 26 up to the late 30 minutes, you're having Klaus at 38 gets a yellow trying to avoid a turnover encounter. I mean, it's that kind of a thing where St. Louis is on the defensive and we're hoping that something at halftime is going to change. You're feeling like they just need to hold on in the back part of this second half. It is markedly different than what it was in the first 15, 20 minutes. And eventually, San Jose was able to do enough to break us down and have the lead.
Yep. I want to say one more thing about the build-up problem is that we would get Berkey with the ball, right? And Berkey typically waits, or a center back waits and baits the attackers to press, and then they kick it long, right? They cover this a lot in the second half. And so Berkey would put his foot on the ball and no one would do anything from San Jose. They refused to press, which was a planned thing, right? They were worried about St. Louis being successful punting the ball to Klaus. Obviously, that's a good thing to worry about. And so St. Louis didn't know what to do with that. And the build-up without Durkin was a little bit scary. So I just wanted to note that was like, this was a problem that wasn't solved in the first half that we can talk about in the second half.
Honestly, that's such an astute observation because that was a cascade effect from Durkin not being there, but more so from what San Jose was giving us. You know, we weren't really able to play the ball through the midfield anywhere near effectively, but also even to our wings. We didn't even really attempt to do that. It was the send it long, win the 50-50, and progress the ball from about the midfield point up, winning those battles, relying on the duels. And it was an interesting it was kind of an interesting thing to see San Jose do. Looking at the stats after the game, it's even more interesting to see the average height of the defensive actions. San Jose had a higher line than St. Louis did. So they didn't have very many actions in the defensive in St. Louis's defensive half, but they had a lot of defensive actions around the midfield area. And so they were very holed up in what they wanted their game plan to be while St. Louis had the ball. For better or for worse, St. Louis didn't have the ball much in this game, but it was not really exactly what I expected from San Jose overall.
Agree. I mean, good coaching there, good game plan for sure. Lastly, I do want to say it did remind me when there was like no problem solving. It reminded me of that final playoff game against KC in KC where both goalkeepers were just punting it back and forth, and it was just like, this is ridiculous. But it's good to note that it wasn't working because eventually that problem does get solved. And, the next iteration after they weren't pressing, we didn't know what to do. Berkey did send one or two to Totland, and Totland was able to gather another one to Horn that went out of bounds. So it was a problem. Okay. Yeah. We've covered it. I just wanted to make sure that was super clear and everybody noted the bad and that there was progress made after halftime. Do you want to cover anything else in the first half?
Probably the San Jose goal is a good one.
Oh, right. That needs to be talked about.
Yeah. Around 40 minutes, San Jose they still took a lot of the possession in this one. It finally led to a link-up play that Christian Espinoza started it. Jeremy Bobasi ended up getting the goal. The final third was broken down by a give and go. And this was something that I think led to the defensive midfield role with the back line in that area. And it was Hebert, Yarrow, Horn, and Watts at this point. They couldn't handle the give and go. And this has been a weakness of St. Louis is you have quick movements in tight spaces between the lines. And if you have quality players who can effectively put the ball where it needs to be, then they're going to beat you. And they beat us this time. And that was dangerous because this is one of those moments that matters for longer periods of time. 40 minutes is right before halftime. And so now you're sitting there at halftime thinking, if you're St. Louis, okay, we've just been shellacked for the past 25, 30 minutes. and we need to figure out a way to turn this around. We just had a goal scored on us. They have momentum now. What do we need to do to turn this around? And if you're San Jose, you're going into halftime thinking, we're right back in this. Yeah, we got punched in the face to start this game, but we just scored. We've been dominating possession. We've been progressing the ball. This is our opportunity. So that's how they went into half, kind of sitting around with that. And on top of that, you had the Giannis Horn injury, or Giannis Horn needing to come out. I wouldn't say an injury, but Giannis Horn had told John Hackworth, like you said, Phil, around 40 minutes or so, he needs to come out. And so Hackworth said, I need you to stay 5-10 more minutes. Like you gotta get through this because we need you. And so that's why they made the sub at half, which was the like for like. So that explained the Jay Reed for Giannis Horn as opposed to doing anything more more drastic in the strategery of it all.
Strategery.
Yeah.
Very nice. Beautiful goal there. I do want to say that Abovisi did some really amazing number
He's
9
quality.
work.
He's quality.
Yep. Good hold up play and speed and power and finishing all in one play. Well done. Okay. Halftime stats. St. Louis has 1.83 XG to 0.98 to San Jose. So that works out pretty darn close to what really happened.
But part of that is the PK. I mean, when you look at XG numbers, with this kind of game, 0.79 of that 1.83 was the PK. And so it was pretty even otherwise, it seemed.
St. Louis 5 shots to San Jose 9, only 2 on goal for St. Louis, 4 on goal from San Jose. So Berkey keeping us in this game, arguably 45% possession in the end of the first half to 55% possession. Right how St. Louis wants it, right?
Right how St. Louis wants it. It's also right how San Jose doesn't want it. So that was another oddity of it. But I guess in that regard, if you're thinking about how St. Louis sometimes happens, where we have a higher number of possession and we have the ball, we have the quote unquote momentum, but we're unable to break down the defense. We're not able to get through. That's what San Jose was tonight. They had the ball for long periods of time. They were pressuring us. We didn't have the high press, high turnover work that we did consistently, but at the same time, we absorbed their pressure. Like this could have ended up so much worse if they were successfully breaking us down. But when you're playing a team like San Jose, you have to set yourself above that level of competition. And I think it goes back to what I was saying the last time we played this team, which was winning against San Jose does prove something important. It proves that you are not the bottom of the league. It proves that you have successful things to build off of. San Jose has a difficult time making those kinds of arguments. And so this win, the way that we absorb the pressure speaks to how effective we can be when we stick to our game plan in certain areas like possession numbers, but we force teams that typically like low possession, counterattack offenses. We force those teams into working and trying to break us down other ways. And so I think that has to be looked at as some level of success from St. Louis too.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk more about that at the end of the game. And this second half isn't as active and exciting.
No.
Matt, we'll probably have to skip through some of these. I think I overdid it on the notes, but
that's okay. I mean, honestly, it's a forgettable half by and large. And at 53, I like how in your notes you say San Jose won't press.
Yes.
And that again highlights this entire half. So after when Jay Reed came in, not a whole lot changed, except for I did think we had better buildup on our left a few more times, right? You called this out post game with John Hackworth and asked him about Jay Reed. And I thought that was a good question because I noticed it too. I noticed there was more of a propensity in the second half, not only for Hartle to be dropping back into midfield alongside Watts a little bit more, but he was doing so on the left-hand side, working the link-up play and the overlapping runs with Jay Reed. He was letting Reed take a little bit more of a lead into the attack and overlap him than he did in the first half with Giannis Horn. Jay Reed was doing a great job on both sides of the ball. Hackworth called it out his performance, great defensive work. He, at some points, I made note in the second half, especially later on, was doing a great job against Christian Espinoza.
Yeah,
their right mid, right winger, who I talked in length about on Flyover Footy, leads their team in assists. I think he has 12. One of their leading goal scorers, focal point of their offense. Jay Reed, when he came in, needed to shut him down, and he did a good job of doing that.
Yeah, his hands full, but I wasn't as nervous as some of those crosses that were coming in, honestly, when I saw those two going at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think his biggest contribution was the buildup, and got to give a lot of credit to Hartle coming in and those two working together. I actually thought maybe that was a tweak, but I think it just naturally happened. And so But we had an outlet right at that point. The game plan became viable at that point. The problem was solved. Figured out how to go up that left-hand side, even if we couldn't press or build up right through the middle as we usually do. Next biggest thing is 56-minute. Indy and Simon Betcher come on for Klaus and Alm. What do you think about this, Matt?
It's on like for like. So Indy sliding out to Alm's right. Betcher took up top. This was telling me that Hack was okay with how our formation was working. He was okay with how things were playing because he didn't feel the need to change things up. There was nothing drastic like putting JGR. I mentioned earlier, I think at halftime, that I wondered if Jake Erdwood-Reich would come in for a Giannis Horn or for a Thomas Totlin, and you would slide Akil Watts back. You would have some kind of a different look with your midfield, however that was. But he just did like for like subs there at 56, and this was his second of three sub windows. So you really saw not only like for like subs, but early. I made note of just how early it was. Before even 60 minutes, you're making your second to last sub window, and you're using 4 of your 5 subs now. That's significant. Not that it was hot or humid or anything like that. They had the elements to contend with, but you're putting, and Hackworth mentioned this post game too. He put a lot of trust in some of those players who were being tasked to go 90. Thomas Totlin he called out, Marcel Hartl, Cedric Teuchert, those kinds of players who, with this move at 56 to bring in Indiana Vassilev and Simon Betcher for Klaus and Rasmus Alm, you're putting pressure on those guys that they need to perform. Thomas Totlin most notably because he hasn't played in the past 3 games. Kind of a big deal for him to be going 90.
Completely agree. We, at this point, start seeing St. Louis settle in very strongly into the mid block and just making sure they were going to defend out this game. It's nice that Hack didn't put in more defensive roles, because what if they lost the lead? That's something that I think was on every St. Louis fan's mind at this point, right? Like, can we hold the line? Can we get out of this game with the lead, sitting back as much as we are? And, you know, we know the end, so we know that it worked out. But we start seeing a lot of pressure. 67th minute is kind of some of the best possession as San Jose has gotten in the game. And in the 68th minute, there's a dangerous long ball that Yaro kind of fouled the guy running on number 16.
This one was dangerous. This one was leading to a goal. It ended up not having anything happen, but I could already see the folks on social media getting onto Josh Yaro for letting the guy get in behind him. But it was called offside. So anger tweets, you can kind of delete those. Yaro did fine in transition there.
Offside. Oh no, he offside trapped him. He did it on purpose.
Yes.
That's what we're gonna give you. In the 71st minute, I noticed St. Louis was having a hard time connecting passes. So that was a little bit disheartening for me, that it looked like they were kind of doubling down, even in their minds, on sitting back and defending out. 72nd minute, another chance created for San Jose, well defended. Sorry, Matt, I can't read while we're talking to cut ahead. Is there a spot you want to mention next?
No, I mean, 75 minutes or so, I made the note that we only had like 4 or 5 shots total. And that was, it was jarring for me, because not only one of the keys to the game that I said earlier was we needed volume against William Yarbrough, because he'll allow goals if he just put shots on goal. We were so ineffective at doing that. It really did seem like we were on the precipice of allowing that one moment that would break a line, or we'd give up a corner kick and something would happen. They weren't pressuring overtly, but they had enough possession of the ball consistently, and they were preventing us from making inroads into the final third, into even the attacking half, with much danger, much bite to it. So once this happened, we had a few more shots. You know, after 75, we had a couple more shots. Simon Betcher had one at 84. Indiana Vassilev had one at 78. But again, these are sub 0.1 XG per shots. That's like a kind of a good metric for, is it a pretty good quality shot, pretty poor quality? Neither of these really had much to them. But then at 78, you know, the substitution, that the last sub that happened.
That chance before 78, though, that chance was really nice. I think it was the only good chance for St. Louis in the second half, where Betcher kind of took it to the corner really early still.
Oh, yeah.
And they get a throw because he just kicks it off the defender out of bounds. But he throws it into Totlin, and Totlin tricks a guy. Totlin had a good game. We saw a lot of Totlin things. This was the most Totlin thing of the game, in my opinion. He tricks a guy, gets past him, and he passes it. I think it's a back pass that falls to Indy's left foot. And he gets for Indy, he doesn't always do this. He often curls it to the far corner. In this case, he slammed it with his left foot. It fell to his left foot, and it's deflected out for a corner. That corner was defended out. No, unfortunately, San Jose is 25th or something like that in defending corners or set pieces or something like that. So I was hoping should have been a goal to happen. Yeah. It didn't, but that was a good chance at least.
It was, and it was one of our only chances. You could say it's one of our best chances, but it was one of our only chances, really. And so it's notable that Thomas Totland was involved in that. And also, I'm glad that Indy had an opportunity with that too.
Yeah.
Of all the players that have really fallen off in the past month or two since the new guys arrived, you really have to point to Indiana Vassilev as he's lost his spot, not just to Hartl and Toyshirt, but he's lost his spot to Rasmus Alm and Knut Thorsen, even Simon Betcher. Really. So he's losing minutes. And so these are important times for Indiana Vassilev to make the most of that kind of an opportunity. So the shot was blocked, but it was a good chance created.
Sorry I wanted to bring that in, at least some positivity there in the second half. 78th minute, Thor off for JGR. What'd you see here, Matt?
This was a little bit of a formation change. You went to more of a double pivot. You had Watts and JGR at central defensive midfield. Hartl moved out left. Toyshirt and Indiana Vassilev were center and right, and then Betcher up top. So it was more traditional 4-2-3-1 for St. Louis at this point when JGR came on, which was fine because I think dropping an extra guy back in the middle helped clog up a little space. And you had some free-flowing abilities from our defensive midfielders in preventing some of those runs, the give and goes that they were trying earlier in the game. So I enjoyed this, and it didn't necessarily seem like it was parking the bus at all, but it was just reinforcing a little bit of how the game state was going, right? We needed to preserve the lead. And at the end of the day, that helped us do it. I'm not going to question for a second whether it was a good idea, whether we should have been going for a goal or not, because we also talked recently about how St. Louis has given up the most points from winning positions. Okay. The ultimate goal is to come away with 3 points. And we did that by employing the tactics that we did in order to preserve the lead, not extend it.
Only a couple more things left here. In the 85th minute, I've skipped a few of these things where Watts kind of did a good job doing his job as a 6. And here we see in the 85th minute, JGR kind of gets the ball in possession and the kind of the left half space in the attack. And he gets there and he's kind of like, he could dribble toward goal, but he kind of dribbles away from goal at an angle, looking at the two teammates on the left side. So it's like clear he's dribbling straight to where he's going to pass it to one of those two. He was never going to turn right and kind of look for a cross or go for goal or anything or dribble in, So we're seeing like a center back who can play the 6 role, dribble up toward the box, right? So it looks very much a little clunky. I'll just call it that. Mm-hmm. Not bad, just a tiny bit clunky compared to other MLS attackers, of course. So we see that, and when he gets it out, Watts ends up with the ball. And he does dribble a little bit more shifty toward goal, right? And he's a little bit scarier. And so I know a lot of people were going off on Watts in this game, but he did serve his role good enough. And while some people aren't a fan of how casual he may look in defense, he still got the job done, and he still brings a lot to the table as far as passing and dribbling and getting out of trouble. So just to see the clear difference between JGR and maybe why he shouldn't have come in too early in case we needed to get a goal back or something. But it was nice to see Watts and JGR next to each other because it felt like I could breathe at that point, that if we needed to defend the game out, that was a much safer look for me.
Yeah, and I mean, credit to Akil Watts. I think things changed when he came on, but they were already trending in that direction. Yeah. So it's notable looking at the stats post-game is that Akil Watts had the most accurate passes of anyone to play 45 minutes or more. He had 30 of 30 accurate passes. That's quality work in connecting when he needed to and in trying to progress the ball in meaningful ways. Defensive wise, he had 5 recoveries, 2 of 5 tackles won. So he wasn't great at his challenges, but he did have 6 of 9 ground duels won. So a good job by Akil Watts, I would say overall. And he did what he needed to do in preserving that lead when he came on.
Great stats there, Matt. Thank you. 88th minute, Hack gets a yellow. We got to mention that.
He took umbrage to some tackles that Simon Betcher was going through. Yeah.
Something like this.
Right. Yeah, he was animated on the sideline. Betcher did a good job of kind of jumping over and protecting himself, but Hackworth had a few choice words for the officials, not really feeling there was some consistency going on, and called out the attempts on Simon Betcher there. But yes,
Mhm.
Hackworth was very much okay with that because, as he said post game, it also happened to waste about 30 seconds or so, and at that point, they were definitely trying to kill the game. So he felt like he was doing his part to help the team there.
Yeah. Right before that happened, actually, in the 86th minute, Reed is his best defending versus Espinoza happened, where he just totally bodied Espinoza off the ball to the point where Espinoza went ahead and just fouled Reed. And
Yes.
so, good job, Reed.
That's one of those moments that I mentioned earlier that when you're killing off a game, you have to have these 1v1 moments work. You can't be beaten and then open up space when other guys have to peel off of the guys they're defending. And this was Jay Reed doing a great job in the dying moments against one of, if not the best San Jose player.
Absolutely. I want to just give one thought from me, and then I'm going to hand it over. We got some stats we can talk about. We can talk about anything we want, really. But I think my overall thought was Hack mentioned in the post-game presser that he was really proud of the way the boys defended. I think he called it brave defending.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at all the opportunities San Jose had, look at how much they had the ball, and you notice they weren't able to do much with it, especially in the second half. So I think he was, I don't know, you could see it different ways, right? It could be coach speak, like, hey, he mentioned, I wanted the guys to press more, but we were up 2-0 at that point, and it just wasn't in the cards or something like that. I'm rephrasing what he said, but these are just things he said, and it's like the kind of stuff I'll think about. Yes, these guys defended out great. I keep watching game after game, like, are we going to press more? Are we going to focus on pressing? Or are we going to focus on the mid block? And we've just been a little bit of both, right, Matt? I don't know what you would think of it, though.
Well, John Hackworth in general seems to have employed a little less of an all-out press, or at least a higher press that Bradley Carnell had.
Yeah.
There are more times where we would fall into a mid-block of sorts, and we wouldn't have as high of a line. The average height of defensive actions has fluctuated a little more wildly between games. And I credit that to an appreciation of the game state, an appreciation of your opponent, and being more flexible and versatile in how you need to defend. And this was kind of part of that, where Hackworth said post-game that he did want them to press higher, but knowing that the game state didn't call for that. You didn't want to spread yourself too thin and get beaten as a result. If your high press is beaten, then how are you going to be defending in transition on the backside? And that's burned us plenty of times. And so if you have players who are knowing and aware of what the game state is and what it calls for, and they're pressing appropriately for that to accomplish the goal in preserving the lead, you have to give some credit to that. And that seems to be what the leaders on this team in Klaus and Hartle and Toyshirt are doing. When these guys are initiating their press, they're being smart about when and where they're doing it. So I enjoyed that. I get the idea of wanting to high press more, but I also know that what they did led to us winning the game in 3 points. So I'm happy with what they did.
Agree. Have we been tracking like the PPDA per game? Like, is that number changing a lot, Matt?
No, it hasn't. And it hasn't changed because there hasn't been much of a change from the first. I mean, it normalized after about 6 or 7 games into the season, and it hasn't changed at all from there. And so what's interesting about that is PPDA tells a large story about high pressing, but it also has to take into account how the other team is moving the ball. So PPDA is passes per defensive action. So you could have 7 passes allowed before you make a defensive action, and you could take control of the ball on either side of the field. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't necessarily stay, are you pressing high? Are you taking the ball high? Or are you allowing them to progress the ball into your defensive third and then you take the ball? It kind of depends on how the opposition, what you're allowing them to do. Are you allowing them to play out of the back? Are you allowing them to send the ball long? And I would say San Jose was, they had more control of the ball, so they were holding on to the ball a little more. But oftentimes, they would just try to send the ball long when they had it. And so there were a lot of loose ball moments. And so I feel that the height of defensive actions helps to tell the story along with the passes per defensive action or the location of the defensive actions, just as much as that individual PPDA, because it tells you kind of where on the field you're trying to engage the ball. And that's why I like to cover that a lot on Fallout, because it works in tandem with the overall PPDA numbers in context of, do you press more high up the field?
Yeah, that's something I'd like to get better at next year. Me personally, I'd like to track height of that, the point of engagement, and then also PPDA and contextually with all of that.
Well, part of it too is that I honestly haven't found a good stats site that actually tracks the PPDA itself per game. What I've been trying to do is track the overall numbers and the quantity as it adds up among itself on the websites that do it for the season. And so I'm able to take like the snapshot of before the game versus the snapshot after the game and kind of compare it to get a sense of how we did during that game. If anybody out there knows of a PPDA per game site, I am all ears. That's one of the few stats that has eluded me so far this season.
It's always fun to look at the goals added chart. Hartle is pretty much double of the best of the rest. So Hartle had a big game in this one. Most of his games have been pretty big. Then Teukert, is Totland number 14?
Totland and Yarrow.
And Yarrow's number 15. So those three kind of are equal with each other. And then it's Hiebert and the rest kind of starting to phase out as it goes down.
Yeah, and goals added is, I always try to give context to what goals added is every time we talk about it, because you look at this chart and you see certain players have higher goals added, and so you think that, you think about shots and you think about successful passes and stuff like that, and so you think how that they had the best games compared to somebody like Akil Watts, who is one of, it looks like 4 players who had negative goals added. But the problem with that is goals added takes 6 different measurements, and it views every single action almost with equal weight. So it views a shot the same as a pass, the same as a received pass, the same as a foul or a foul drawn or a turnover or a recovery. All of these actions, every single action that a player takes with the ball or in an action that affects the ball, like a foul or a penalty or something like that, and it gives weight to it. And so like Akil Watts playing the role he had where he made back passes, for instance. Let's say he made a pass from the defensive midfield back to the center back. Well, that's a negative stat for goals added. He will lose points if you pass the ball like that. Same thing with Knut Thorsen. He had passes and actions that led him to have overall negative, but that's not saying that he had a bad game. So knowing where the players were and what their roles were and how they played the game is important context to have for goals added. But no matter what you look at on these individual players, Marcel Hartle had himself one hell of a game.
Yes, he did. Any other thoughts from you, Matt?
Oh gosh, this is flying by the seat of our pants this week since we're up into the wee hours of Sunday morning. But I will say that I wanted to touch on the Thomas Totland, Jake Nerwinski conversation really quick. Because this was Totland's first start in 4 games, and before this, we had I had gotten a question on Twitter, kind of asking, did anybody ask about Totland Nerwinski at the press conference last week? And I know I didn't, but I did want to say that Hackworth addressed them post game, and he did talk about how Jake and Totland have been fighting for minutes during training, and didn't say anything about issues with either one of them, but just said that he liked a lot of what he saw from Totland tonight. He noted that there has been a very intense positional battle going on with Jake and Thomas Totland, called it fierce, and said that nobody has played poorly. Totland has stayed focused, hasn't wavered, and he called tonight Totland's best defensive performance of the year. And I thought, in the moment, and this was just an hour ago or so, I thought in the moment, I was like, oh, that's noteworthy because Totland's a two-way player, and it's, that's something for Hackworth to very specifically call out Totland's defensive performance. But then the more I thought about it, and as I'm talking, I realized that in the context of Totland Nerwinski, calling out Totland's defensive performance is basically saying why you started Jake Nerwinski over Totland these past few games, knowing that you needed more defensive capabilities on the right. So if you're looking back at these past few games and you're thinking, why is Totland sitting on the bench? Hackworth needed something different on the right side than what Totland had shown he was best at in the recent past. It was Nerwinski is a better defender on the right side and has done enough in training to earn that spot over the past few games. Totland gets the nod tonight, and Hackworth calls it his best defensive performance. If you're building off of that, I can already tell you I'm going to be penciling in Totland in my starting 11 for next week against SKC based off of that one comment alone.
I agree. The best defensive moment for me for Totland, did you guys remember when at some point he went so far across the field that he passed up Yarrow and almost met Hebert to head a ball away on a long ball? So he was behind and past them as far as width of the field. So he did a great job on that one, tracking back, making sure that a ball wasn't going to get through. So good job on that. And I think, if you're not noticing mistakes, that's a good thing for a defender as well. So you got to throw that in there as well.
Definitely. One last thing that I'll say is I'm interested to see if we run out this 4-1-4-1 again, because while it was effective at the beginning, you can't really say that it did a lot in generating offense. Our attack was pretty anemic for large portions of this game. And I do wonder if it was because of the spacing of some of the players. You have width for days on the back line and in the attack, but how's the verticality going? Looking at Knut Thorson's stats, looking at his performance, I do wonder if his positioning and kind of where he was might have been impacted just by others around him. So like the Cedric Teuchert, the Marcel Hartl positioning around Knut Thorson, where he was asked to be on that left wing side, whereas maybe he's kind of more of a second striker left mid. He needs more space to operate in and around the box, and he didn't have that opportunity with Hartl and Teuchert. So I look for probably a little bit of a change. Maybe this was done out of necessity, also not having Edu Leuven available and just trying something different in that regard. Could have also been because of the specific opponent in San Jose. So I'm sure that'll play into what we see against SKC. But yeah, that 4-1-4-1 was interesting.
I think you can't overlook that teams are still bunkering on St. Louis to try to just get them to try to score, and I think it's getting more and more dangerous because St. Louis is becoming better and better on the attack. Yeah. But if San Jose had decided to bunker in on us, maybe let's say we didn't get that early goal and their plan was always to kind of bunker in on us, Thor would have been useful in that case, right?
Right.
So it's good to have Thor in case we need to break down a bunkered defense. When that didn't happen, maybe we should have brought Indy in sooner. That's the only thing I was thinking is I thought this was an Indy game, right? Like we're going to want to counterattack. Indy's good with that. He's better than that than being in tight spaces. But also Indy was there for when Alm needs to come off because he's probably not 90 minutes healthy at this point. So, a little bit hands tied behind his back, Hackworth on that one, maybe. But I don't know. Those are just some thoughts I had.
One of the things I look forward to talking about on Thursday is going to be, given the fact that Marcel Hartl and Cedric Teuchert are two of our top attackers, so you figure you put them and Leuven in the lineup no matter what happens. What does that mean for others around them? Like we saw in this game is a really interesting case study in the effects of Thorson, the effects of Alm, and having a single striker up top when those two are doing so much. Like they run and they put themselves in so many portions of the field that it impacts the positioning and play styles of others. And so who is best to fit in them? It's almost like you have this core now of St. Louis where the caliber and the quality has been raised. So how do you fill in the pieces that make sense to benefit those players the most? Like those players need to be where they are. And so who works best around them in addition to who's just in the best form?
And Chris Gebhardt mentions next year, defenses will have even more to deal with Celio and Ostrak coming back. So something to keep in mind. I love that comment from Matt. I think that's a good one to close on if you're happy with that.
Agreed. I will note that we are heading into Derby week. So no matter when you're listening to this, if you're still up with us on the wee hours of Sunday morning, if you're listening to this on Sunday, Monday, or starting your week with us, it's Derby week. Cedric Teuchert postgame mentioned it at least 3 times that they're getting ready for the Derby game next week. It is already in their minds. They know what's ahead. They know what this means. And we're currently tied in the standings on points, even though we have a game in hand. And like I said, SKC has that nice little E in front of their name in the standings now for eliminated from playoffs. They're going to be fighting just to take us down, just to eliminate us. If they win, they could do that. So they'll get to hold that over our heads. That's what they're fighting for. It's a fun grudge match coming up this next week.
That's well said. I didn't think about how they could play the spoilers, so that's interesting.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. If you made it for Fallout After Dark, it's been a fun one. Lots of people in the chat, so thank you so much if you guys joined us in the chat, stayed up with us so much.
So appreciate it.
Yeah, man. All right. Good night, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the game. We'll be talking to you Thursday night about the next